Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to have a look at what to do if your faction is struggling in 9th edition. I'm going to talk to a few of my friends who all play struggling factions, and they're going to give me some tips on what I can do, because I chose Genestealer Cult as my 9th edition army, and the internet has told me that they suck. So I asked them for some advice and I thought it was pretty good, so I thought why not record it and put it into a video for everyone to see. So we're going to start off with my friend Quipster, who plays Imperial Fists. Good evening, Mr. Quipster, how are you?
I am wonderful and exceptionally tired, so I apologise if I ramble a bit today.
That's all right. Well, do you want to start off then by explaining to the viewers why do Imperial Fists suck? What's gone wrong? I was told Space Marines were overpowered. What's happened?
So this is the thing with Imperial Fists. They're at the lower end of the Space Marine options out there, but from what I've seen, everything in their codex is so specific. Yeah. Everything is so contextual. Their super doctrine is just it's never going to be useful.
Yeah.
It's the same with a lot of their strats as well. Like some of the strats, you're like +1 to wound against buildings.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. You are so ready for that building meta, aren't you?
Oh my god, yeah. But yeah, it's just everything is so specific. So what I've found so far is with the army itself, you just have to kind of lean on the Space Marine strats as much as anything else. And I think I'm a really bad example for this question when it comes to Imperial Fists, because my army list is just any old random nonsense I put together, because it's just stuff I had lying around. I think a better example, actually, is my Custodes. And Custodes throughout the whole of 8th edition were not a top-tier army. The thing with Custodes, playing them as an underpowered army in highly competitive London meta, is you just have to know the army forwards and backwards. You have to know when you can use every strat. You have to know when to save CP for strats that you know need to be coming up. You have to be very, very on the ball with your special abilities, your warlord traits. You can have no wastage, basically. You can't put a foot wrong, and they can be very unforgiving like that.
And you are somebody who plays the same list again and again and again, right?
Yes. A big reason for that was because I spent an entire year painting someone else's army. So I didn't have any other models. So I was just like, I'm going to play the same 1500 list. So 1500 point list for 50 games in a row, I think it was.
Yeah.
So you just get to know everything on the field that you're able to play extremely well, and it gets to the point where you look at what your opponent's bringing to the table, and you think to yourself, okay, I know exactly how much damage each unit can take from whatever they could bring, so I know how much I need to put on each objective to keep it and not be shot off.
Yeah, you know your matchups really well.
Exactly.
That's a big deal. I think there's nothing wrong with teching in things here and there, but I think especially when you're trying to get to know an army, especially if it's a weaker army, if you just completely change the direction of the list, you're going to really struggle to know how it plays. Even something as simple as Tau as Farsight Enclaves and Triptide are two very different things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the points that I would really raise for someone who was like going into like a lower powered army, the things I did were, number one, know the strats inside out, know your know what every model does inside and out, but also lower your expectations. Like, know that I mean, it's just the fact that like you're not going to win every game. Like,
it's a very good point.
Yeah, like you can't go into every match thinking, I'm playing 8th edition Iron Hands, it's likely that I'm going to win. Like, no, you're going to have to work for it, and you have to know that going in. And also on top of that, I would say what I did was I kept a spreadsheet of every single game that I played and every matchup, and I recorded who I was playing, the army they brought, the sub-faction, the points, what mission, and whether it was a win or a lose. And then I had notes on the end for every single game, and I wrote in the notes, this is what I did wrong. Yep. These are the things that happened that made sure I lose. Or these are the things I did that meant that I won. And going back and be able to refer to that, it's actually really handy, especially with a low-powered army, because it's really unforgiving.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's great. It might be a bit far. I'm not certain everybody loves Excel as much as you and perhaps Rebooting Element. But I do think a big part of the game that people miss out on if they don't do is the talking to their opponents after the game to talk about how you can develop. Even if you don't have the Excel, you need to have that conversation exactly as you just said of, so what went right for me there? I was surprised I beat Harlequins. How did that happen? Or the other way, it's like, okay, I felt like I was on the back foot from the beginning. Do you think there was any point where I could have swung this the other way? And quite frankly, it's people are so open to having this conversation because people always want to talk about Warhammer, right? So I think one of the big strengths I've been finding in playing GSC is just because Imperial Fists are a very rare army, and GSC you just don't see very often. And so when it comes to repeating matchups, I have this huge advantage because when you are looking at GSC or something like a 35% win rate, I think something like that. And that's not great, okay? It's not great for game balance, but in terms of if you take a 35% win rate but give only that person the knowledge of how this matchup normally plays out, that 35% goes up a bit. Quite a bit, really. So I think playing that same list again and again and again, knowing your matchups really, really well, and you can only get there by being prepared to lose all those games, as we've said, are pretty good tenets to go by.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like going to the gym, to be honest. Getting ready for a Warhammer competition. You've got to get the reps in. Like, that's just it.
It's at this point, of course, that Quipster goes on and talks about his gym routine for the next 15 minutes. So we're going to move on and talk to our next guest, Ben, because who better to teach me how to play Genestealer Cults than a player of their star gods? Hello, Ben. How are you today?
Hello, I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
No worries. So, had you on because you're playing Tyranids, and Tyranids fascinate me because the book is, I would say, not that strong, and the only reason I say that is because a lot of the kind of classic Tyranid lists are not doing that well right now, and yet there are some lists that are doing really well, and you've been having some great success. So how did you kind of go about playing Tyranids to get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I've been playing Tyranids for a while through kind of 7th, 8th, 9th editions, so I feel like I know them quite well. And basically, I'm not the most tactically minded player, so I've always kind of taken a cue from various podcasts that I listen to and what the rest of the meta is doing. And I don't, have any trouble admitting that. It's fine. I'm not the best, list builder.
My advice would be, if you netlist an incredibly difficult to play army, don't be surprised if then you can't play that army that well. But at the same time, not everybody plays 40k 3 times a week. So not everybody gets this opportunity to, really refine a list. So if you're someone that just gets to play half a dozen tournaments a year and a little bit with their mates, then take whatever you can off the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think my journey with Tyranids has been quite a frustrating one, like you say, because they've always been underperforming, but have had a few really, really incredible lists. Some people always come up with really, really interesting Tyranid lists, which work, not because they have a lot of brute strength or anything like that, or are really survivable, but because they have a lot of stratagems, a lot of units. It's a really, really deep codex to choose from. And that's only increased with Psychic Awakening, which they got some amazing things for.
One of the things about your list that really struck me is you kind of have haven't really spammed the best unit, and I think one of the reasons for that is because in the Tyranid book a lot of the power comes from some really great stratagems, and so you obviously only use a stratagem on one unit, so actually I feel like that's the great thing about that list.
Yeah, and it's kind of a blessing and a curse with the stratagem power, because they don't they're very CP hungry, I guess is the phrase.
Yeah.
So you'll often find you'll blow 8 CP in the first turn, and you might only start with 9 because of the way that this list works. So basically this list is based on one designed, I think, by John Lennon, but I think it was kind of co-designed by various people in the US a couple of months ago, maybe. And it's basically Battalion Patrol. You have 2 Democarons, which are big Forge World monsters, and they are very fast, reasonably durable because they've got an invuln. So I think that's something that's drawn me to that list as well, because you can have this big fun monster, but also it's survivable to a certain degree. But yeah, to go back to the stratagems, so there are a lot of really good ones. We've got shoot again with an infantry unit for 2 CP. We've got fight again for 3 CP. The things that I found myself using recently with this list, because it's basically a list that's designed to kind of shoot threats forward, and then if you can, run them away after you've killed something, with a stratagem called Overrun, which I'm sure lots of people will know about, but a lot of opponents don't know about it. And that basically lets you move again for 1 CP, so it's very cheap, as long as there's nothing within 3 inches at the end of the fight phase. So you have to kill something, then you can run away. So straight away you can see how powerful that would be against slower armies, or armies with no long-range firepower. And the other part of this list is a shooting element. So that's a Kronos detachment with Hive Guard and Exocrine, which are basically the 2 best things in the Lids Codex, I think. Ironically, because it's shooting, and you don't really think of Tyranids as being amazing shooting army, but they actually have some really, really good shooting.
Yeah. I think 2 other big lessons just listening to you talk about your list. Number 1 is you've got a lot of kind of anti-meta stuff there, which obviously definitely applies if you're playing a weaker book. So yeah, is that something that you think you might change as time goes on?
I'm just kind of waiting for this list to be invalidated, really, because as we all know, competitive players, the meta moves so quickly.
Tyranids adapt.
yeah, true. But yeah, we've seen that from the Codex releases recently. Everyone's getting some pretty good stuff, so I'm hopeful for the future. But I think the list works really well because it does have that. It's got that kind of anti-meta duality to it. So it's got combat, shooting, and a reasonable amount of psychic as well.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I love running this list, because it feels like what a list should be. You get to engage in all the phases. You get to do a bit of everything. You get big monsters. You've got little bugs as well. You've got cool psychic, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing about your list that I really like, that you like, is that you've put stuff in there that you love, which I'm guessing, from knowing you, is like the big bugs. And I think that's something that's important, right? Like, if you just make a list that's pure efficiency, you might fatigue from it. And I was talking to Quipster, and he was talking about the benefits of playing the same list again and again to get that practice in. But it's going to be much harder if you don't love your list. Yeah,
for sure. And I've kind of gone back and forth with that over the various editions of wanting to win, but also wanting to play fun models. But yeah, I'm one of those people who's really dedicated to my faction for some reason. I don't know why. I just love Tyranids. And I'm kind of like, I'd rather bang my head against the wall of Tyranid non-supremacy than chase the meta in a way of collecting new armies. Because most people can't really afford to do that, don't have the time to do that. I'm very happy to find stuff in what we're both agreeing is a generally underpowered codex that I both love visually, thematically, and seems to be pretty good at the moment as well.
Yeah, some really, really great advice there, man. So cheers. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. So we've just got the leader of our little Warhammer group, Charl, left to go, and he is an avid fan of Craftworld Eldar. Hello, Charl. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So I wanted to have you on because you have quite a reputation in our group, which is going to, I think, surprise a lot of listeners, because a lot of people are terrified of playing against your Craftworld Eldar list. And I think a huge part for that is because you have this really kind of unique list that you don't see much nowadays, where it's kind of centered around the Conclave, right?
Yeah, that's right. It is. I mean, I'm tempted to say it is a very unique list. I think at the moment with Knights, it's a very unique list.
It's also Baeltan, we should say as well, which is your personal favourite.
I started Baeltan like everybody else, probably, or Eldar players in general would have started at a younger age, and then kind of it dropped off, and I kind of picked it up again. I was playing 8, and Eldar at the time was all about Ynnari and was a lot about the 3 flyers and
good times.
The good times, the good old times. And I'm sure that other people have been in this situation, but maybe have just kind of drawn a line and gone, actually, I want to stick to my faction because I love it so much, but because it's what it is and it's hard to find a good list, I'm just going to be playing fluffy the whole time. And I just enjoyed the competitive side too much, so I didn't want to do that. So I just kind of like sat down. I was like, how can I make this actually work? And I just looked at like the basics. You look at like what can snowball into being like an effective unit. And I just went over every unit and just looked at like how simple I could make it. I think that's also one of the tricks to it.
Oh, that's a great point.
And so for me, I just kind of was like, I'm going to pick something that's going to maximize shuriken shots, because that's what Beeltand's really good at. Shuriken shots. I need to pick something that's shuriken shots, but then it's got flexibility. And so I just kind of went from there, and it snowballed into me realizing that actually I really needed to try something that was different, that not a lot of people had seen, that was super tooled up, but was quite simple in its factors. It has, all invulnerables. It has pretty much all shuriken as the basis, and it has a lot of speed and a lot of mortal wounds.
Yeah, I think that works really well. I think, for context, I think that you actually decimated my Deathwing castle when we first played, and I think for exactly the reasons you've just mentioned. So a lot of those things were really good in the meta we have of when it was more Space Marines, because Space Marines have a lot of AP, which bounces off invuns, or it's kind of inefficient point spending, I would probably say. And then you have a lot of like strength 4 shots, which was really good at not losing efficiency against an army with transhuman. So it actually it did really well. It was really cool to see, and it was just something that I was blindsided by, to be honest. I didn't see it coming.
I mean, I think that's the enjoyable thing about my list, is there's not a lot of people that understand it, and I think it's quite the advantage. I mean, don't get me wrong, the list is actually built in such a way. There's a few key points that actually make it work, and like one of the biggest points is the stratagem phantasm, and what that does is, with the smaller board on 9th, I can move any one of my jet bikes or my conclave 32 inches up the board, and then still have the capacity to charge if I wanted to, which is ironically what I used to do when I first built the list. I realized actually after playing a lot of games, which I know that your other guests have mentioned, that if you want to get good at a list, playing it over and over again is a must. I think I'm probably 20 games down now, and I'm still kind of learning how to make it work. But for me, what I liked about it is most of my players don't know what to expect, or they think they know, and they just haven't understood the actual, the sharpness of the spear that's getting launched at them. I think part of it is the enjoyment, though, for me. It's just really the fact that I've taken on, my own craft world that I really love, and I've put the time in and found what really works well together. But also that's something that no one actually expects.
Yeah, I think this feeds really well into actually one of the things I said with Quipster. And so if you're taking something that's quite an extreme, but you're the only one who knows how that is going to do up against a competitive Drukhari or Admech or Sisters list or whatever, then actually you're evening the playing field quite a bit. So this is a good way to try and go about it. So I like what you said, where you talked about going back to the basics, like looking at the simple data sheets and seeing what's going to work for you and keeping things straightforward. But then if you can take a bit of pizzazz, as it were, I think that's going to really help you. And I guess the nice thing for you is, even when you've got those matchups where you might not be so confident, Eldar are pretty flexible.
Yeah.
And things like Phantasm really help with that.
I think Phantasm is really, really key in this kind of a building of the list. And sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes it's really just finding a key couple of strats or traits or relics that probably have been overlooked by your opponent, and even when once explained to them, isn't necessarily going to be fully understood the use of it, because I've got 32 bikes in that list in my army. And that's a hell of a lot of mobility. And that means that I can zip around and go anywhere. And that is thanks to Craftworld and Eldar. I still haven't had my first Dakari matchup, but it's coming up soon, so I'll be able to tell you, because that's going to be speed against speed, which will be very interesting, which I haven't had an opportunity to play yet.
Yeah, that will definitely be an interesting matchup, but I will definitely try and put something a bit more pizzazzy into my list, and thanks for coming on. So I'd like to thank all three of my guests for coming on once again. I thought they gave some really great pieces of advice as discussed before, so I really like the things we've talked about today. So we've got, make sure you're playing the same list again and again. If you can put something in to really try and throw your opponent, maybe try and do so. This could be the difference between playing that matchup that you know you're going to lose, you know you're not confident in, and maybe try and trick your opponent up a little bit. Get to know your matchups really, really well, because if you're the only person in that matchup who knows how this will often play out, that's a massive advantage to you, even if you've got the weaker codex. Have all of the basics covered. Be playing that mission, be knowing exactly what you're going to be putting onto objectives and how long those things are going to survive and what they're going to be able to stand up to. And finally, make sure you take something that you know you're going to enjoy. If you're going to have to put all of these hours in to make sure you're really confident with your army, play something that you find fun. So, I hope this is really useful for everyone else who is also playing with a struggling codex, and I'll see you for the next video. Thanks for watching.